Hey guys, so today I'm going to be doing a vlog on Kate Beaton's Hark, Vagrant. This book is a collection of Beaton's comic strips. The comic strips cover a variety of topics from eras to history to comic book characters. Beaton paints all of these strips with her own unique brand of satire. Most of these comic strips are also featured on her website, harkvagrant.com. The link for that website will be in the YouTube video description. We are going to be looking at this book today through a very specific lens. There are many ways in which this book could be read and interpreted, but for today's vlog, we are going to be focused on the context in which this book operates as a book produced in the 21st century. To narrow down that context further, we're going to look at the cultural context of the book. This book covers a variety of historical topics. However, it is almost impossible to look at it through a historical lens because the topics are so wide-ranging, and Beaton also includes so many modern-day references in her book, and it becomes impossible to separate them from this modern-day scope. In order to look at this book from a modern perspective, you need to have a broad understanding of both historical literature and historical topics in general. Some of the topics we're covering in the vlog are the journey of Lewis and Clark, the Victorian age, the discovery of DNA, soldiers in World War II, and also some modern topics such as Vine, civil rights, and revised history. I'm using the idea of revised history in this blog as the idea of giving credit where credit is due, because original narratives paint certain people as more powerful or deserving of credit, and now in modern society, we understand that some of those narratives are skewed, and we're now trying to represent more holistic narratives that include people that actually made discoveries and give that credit where credit is due. This book takes a lot of older pop culture references and literature and repaints them with a modern humorous light to better fit 21st century dialogue. These topics range from the origin of Jane Austen's books to the adventures of sexy Batman. By presenting these topics in bite-sized humorous chunks, they become more relevant to the culture that consumes most of their media online. Beaton is creating comic vines for the modern day consumer. Vine was a video sharing platform that featured 6-second videos. Just like those 6-second snapshot stories of a variety of topics, Beaton provides snapshots of historical topics through satire. Her strips never last more than 6 panels, but often tell a complete story. To showcase this, we're going to look at 2 strips that are both covering a topic Beaton calls sitcom Victorian style. That's on page 165 in this book, but also you can find it online on her website. The strips together equal 6 panels and cover 2 modern-day topics of rating and teenagers, but they cover them as if they were Victorian-era topics. Beaton takes the modern idea of TV show ratings and uses them to cover infant mortality rates, which was a huge problem during that time period. The second strip covers teenagers in a satirical way, with a first panel featuring a Victorian girl talking like a modern-day teenager, and then the last panel featuring her father calling her a spinster. This combination of historical setting and modern-day topics create a dialogue that better fit a modern-day audience. In the book, she also talks a lot about a whole bunch of historical things, but she'll put like just a tiny modern pieces into it, so that might be an idea or a perspective, but by adding these tiny modern pieces, she creates a narrative that can only be looked at from the 21st century perspective. The things that she includes did not exist in the time periods we are looking at, so looking at the time periods from a wholly historical context is impossible. An example of this is several strips about the adventures of Lewis and Clark, featured on page 160. Beaton writes about these from the point of view of Sacagawea and York, who is a African-American guy who is also on the journey and helped Lewis and Clark. These strips showcase the amount of whining hopelessness that Sacagawea and Clark put up with from Lewis and Clark, and also the sheer amount of incompetence that Lewis and Clark display. There's also an ironic joke in one of the panels about York asking for his freedom. These strips showcase our modern understanding, which is that everyone is supposed to have the same amount of rights and credit, but historically, at this time, this idea was not understood. So if you looked at this book from just a historical context, the modern things that she was putting in her writing would make 0 sense. Another example of this is Beaton's hipster brigades, which is on page 41 of the book. World War II Hipster Brigades, which is the name of the comic, is a comic about a battalion of men that were in World War II. This battalion is basically just modern-day hipsters fighting in World War II. They were called the H Brigade, H for hipsters. Just like the modern-day hipsters used ironic fashion, such as beards and flannels, the H Company used ironic uniforms, such as a Roman centurion helmet instead of the regulation uniform. There was also a second strip featuring this cast of characters, and it was a report saying the H Brigade had only liberated cafes because hipsters like trendy things like cafes. This is amusing because modern-day hipsters claim they're above trends and they liked it before it was cool. But beyond that, this is also another example of things that could not happen through an actual historical context, because you have to have the modern day context of hipsters to understand the jokes in this strip. My favorite example in the book of a modern day narrative in the historical context is a strip called Every Lady Scientist Who Ever Did Anything Until Now. That's featured on page 53 in the book. The strip is about Rosalind Franklin, who is largely responsible for the discovery of DNA, and it features her doing her final report, and then Crick and Watson basically just sending her away for a stupid reason, and then they steal what we now know as her work. Watson and Crick get most of the credit for it, even though she did a lot of the work for DNA. And so we have this modern day narrative of looking for the people that actually made the discoveries, even if they were brushed aside originally in history. This, again, could not be looked at through a historical lens because it's so new. This information was not available at the time of the discovery, so it would not be, like, if this comic strip was written in the time that Rosalind did her work, the joke would not make sense. So I guess all I have to say about this book is you do have to view it through a 21st century lens. It's almost impossible to separate it from the 21st century because Beaton does a really good job making topics relevant to modern day readers. But by doing so, it makes them more accessible as modern day topics than it does as historical topics. You have to have both modern day cultural understanding and a grasp of historical topics in literature to fully enjoy this book. By combining these, Beaton creates a modern-day series of comics that readers can relate to and that relate to modern-day culture as a whole. Thanks for watching!